Road Signs. Chapter 6. The Scalpel of Dead Surgeons. We went to the top platform and went to the driver and asked him if he was going to Kingston. The driver said he couldn't be sure, of course, but he thought he was. At any rate, if he wasn't the 11:05 for Kingston, he was probably the 9:32 for Virginia Water, or the 10 o'clock express for the Isle of Wight, or somewhere in that direction, and that we'd know all about it when we got there. We put half a crown in his hand and asked him to make himself the 11:05 for Kingston. "Not a soul on this line will ever know who you are or where you're going," we said. "You know the way, so pull off slowly and go to Kingston." "Well, gentlemen," said the nobleman, "there must be a train going to Kingston. I agree. Give me the half-crown." So we got to Kingston by the London South-Western Railway. Jerome K. Jerome. 3 men in a boat, not counting the dog. Vladimir Pavlovich's voice was quiet. "I know what we should do. We'll go by steam train," he said calmly. "What kind of locomotive?" flashed through my head. There haven't been any locomotives for many years. Probably 100 years. I don't even know how long. But it turned out that Vladimir Pavlovich was expressing himself in a metaphorical sense, so to speak. The mathematician looked at him carefully, probably the same way a scientist used to look at a test tube in which he had put yeast, and the next morning he discovered a little homunculus. "There is a scalpel at the Warsaw station." I probably knew what a scalpel was. It was a missile complex disguised as an ordinary train, with refrigerated cars. A careful look would have recognized something unusual in it, but until the collapse of the USSR, it was a thing in itself, a mythological subject of urban legends. "Stood, you wanted to say." The mathematician's voice was dull and colorless. "You wanted to say that 20 years ago there was a mobile missile complex Scalpel at the Warsaw station." "Yes, that's exactly what I wanted to say," he replied, Vladimir Pavlovich sullenly. "We will still go down, cover the distance to Baltiskaya, to leave the city." "And why do you think that the museum exhibit is operational?" "Because it had to be operational. It had to be not only operational, but also combat-ready." "What? The missile, too?" "And the missile, of course." But here our superiors, surprisingly, did not argue. At that hour, Technological Institute was isolated not only from the northern part of the tunnels, but also from the southern one. We were the last to get to the station from the north, and, it seems, were the last to leave in the direction of Baltiskaya. It was still dry here, but I saw a small stream running between the rails. Something was happening to my hearing. I could hear the crackling of the earth and the sound of water somewhere above, very far away from us. In a word, we had to hurry, and we took off towards Baltiskaya along a completely empty tunnel. We came out onto the surface from the vestibule onto a square that was still dry. Its entire space was randomly filled with cars. It was obvious that people were trying to leave somewhere, desperately hoping that it was still possible to do so along the rails. I must admit this surprised me. If you have your own car, run away from the city on wheels. Obviously the station would be a madhouse. Or maybe they were meeting relatives. No, it was still unclear. There was a rusty porter's cart right on the sidewalk. We threw our junk on it and rolled it in front of us. We looked remarkably like refugees. The numerous boxes and luggage of the mathematician turned into 4 not very large backpacks, one of which contained a mysterious suitcase. We ourselves were ragged and dirty and dragged the cart to the Obvodny Canal, presenting a rather pitiful sight. And then we saw the conductor. It was such an irony of fate. Everything always happens when you least expect it. Although the irony was also in the fact that we met the conductor right next to the station. In my childhood, the conductor was inseparable from the railway. This conductor was not a tram or trolleybus chief, but a cartoon character. He was a black man in a cap. A conductor. By the way, the Romanian leader was called the conductor. The main Romanian was shot 40 years ago, along with his wife. He was killed before I was born, but for some reason this word remained in my memory. The conductor was not just a conductor with tickets, he was a leader. A leader somewhere, and this direction, somewhere, was scary. Once in childhood, when I was capricious, my mother said that she would give me to the conductor. And in a rush of panic, I imagined the conductor taking me away into something that opened up behind the second vestibule, a terrible land of nothingness. And here he is, the conductor, in front of us. I realized that it was the conductor, not by his appearance, but by the fear that he caused in us. My legs literally gave way. I realized that I had lived in vain, that life was meaningless, that I had wasted everything that God had given me. And now I need to show what I had actually achieved in life, but I have nothing to show. The black figure of the conductor was approaching, but Mirzo was in its path. And then something amazing happened. The Tajik suddenly threw his machine gun off his shoulder and took aim. At that moment, he looked like a picture from a shooting training poster, and he was standing correctly, and a real warrior was holding the weapon correctly. And now he began to shoot at the conductor. To me, it was like a Polish lancer attacking tanks. Pointless, but it made me respect the method of self-destruction. And, damn it, it seemed to me that the conductor slowed down a bit. Apparently, this bastard really didn't like that the victim wasn't afraid of him. Maybe it was because the Tajik was a real warrior. Maybe it was our comrade's eastern soul, but the conductor was walking towards him much more slowly than before. And with this, Mirzo saved us all. We, almost crawling, rolling, moved away from the conductor, who was concentrating on Mirzo. I realized that the conductor evoked not fear per se, but terrible shame. Here it would be necessary to use a stronger adjective, because it was shame mixed with a clear and logical understanding of the meaninglessness of one's existence. You were ashamed, like the last stowaway who is being disgraced in front of the entire train car, and you want to die right now, here and now, if only it would end. You want to be taken out and led to either a trial or death, if only to end the current situation. It is no wonder that all the controller's witnesses tried to forget this feeling. Panic and fear can lead to fussy and disorderly movements, but here you wanted to put yourself in order, and then, immediately, hang yourself. And this followed from some irrefutable and logical arguments, which I later, no matter how hard I tried, was never able to remember. Some kind of fuses worked in my head, saving me from going crazy, but Mirzo was able to resist the conductor for about 10 minutes. In my eyes, it was like living in a metallurgical furnace for 10 minutes. One way or another, we crawled far enough when the pain in our head became unbearable, and one after another we lost consciousness. Then it turned out that I was the only one who remembered the moment, when the conductor put his hand on our Tajik comrade's shoulder. Vladimir Pavlovich always assured me that such peculiarities were a kind of compensation for my night dreams and waking up in a sweat. Staggering, we came out onto the embankment of the Obvodny Canal. The water rose and spilled over the cast-iron grate. The embankment was deserted. There were no cars there. Moreover, there was no garbage or car skeletons, to which I had already become accustomed. But while we were walking, in just 15 minutes the water rose again and came out of the canal, leveling the embankment with Obvodny. We knocked the lock off the gates of the railway museum and, hurrying, got out onto the platform. Vladimir Pavlovich was steering the trolley in a direction known only to him, but we soon understood where he was leading us. A rocket stood above the tracks, starting right in the belly of a silver carriage. We stopped near the next carriage of a small train, raising a fountain of spray. At the head of the gray train stood a diesel locomotive, outwardly similar to ordinary ones, but intuitively I understood that not everything was so simple with it. The mathematician looked around, hunted. I thought that right now he was out of his element. Now he had neither numerical superiority nor any high idea on his side. He survives only thanks to our goodwill and a chain of coincidences, especially since now our lives depend not on his secret of the plane, hidden in the hangar, but on the secret of Vladimir Pavlovich. Meanwhile, Vladimir Pavlovich fiddled with the door of the locomotive and finally unlocked it. This was his finest hour. I had never been inside such machines, but I suspected that this locomotive was not at all like the production ones. Indeed, my friend stuck his hand into some cabinet, rummaged around there, grunted with satisfaction, and pressed something. Something squeaked, and the lights of the bulbs, lighting up, ran across the control panel, like our piggeries ran for rations. There was a boom behind the wall, and the engine began to pound steadily. The museum exhibit was coming to life before our eyes. In order not to jinx it, I did not ask whether the diesel fuel that had gone flat over 20 years would be enough. But, as if guessing my question, Vladimir Pavlovich looked me in the face cheerfully and said distinctly, "Here, no. Diesel fuel. This is a completely different engine." The train was shaking, and Vladimir Pavlovich was working his magic over the control panel. "I can't unhook the rocket. Although it has no filling, it is terribly heavy." I looked outside. The rocket was slowly being placed in its case, and the train, like a person waking up, was checking whether everything was in place in its still sleepy organism. Finally, creaking and shuddering, as if stretching, it moved from its place. The water kept rising, and soon the train began to resemble a caravan of boats sailing behind a tug. Vladimir Pavlovich drove the train confidently, following road signs and omens that only he understood. I was simply amazed. Well, you have to live with a person for 20 years to understand that he had a special past life, about which you know nothing. We left the city and moved left along the ring road towards the Moscow-bound railway tracks. The train was moving slowly, as I understood, so that the remote flaw detector could detect a break in the track in time. The green eye of the flaw detector blinked soothingly, and little by little the adrenaline rush began to leave me. I sat down on the floor and leaned against some metal cabinet. I instantly fell into oblivion. I dreamed of the airfield again. Now it was autumn. It was drizzling tediously. The planes were parked under covers, and I was shifting under an umbrella. My father was still not there, and when I couldn't bear it anymore, I went to the canteen. They knew me there, and when I sat down at the table, a woman who looked like Granny Toma waved to me from the cash register. But I remembered that I had no money. It's a very unpleasant feeling in a dream when you don't have something, but you still search your pockets, overcoming the resistance of sleep, as if in viscous water, slowly moving your hands. But what you need is always there. No key to the door, no documents or weapons. "Come here, I'll pour you some compote," said the barmaid. There, in the real life of my childhood, she was called a waitress. Why so? I don't know. She never served anything herself, but always stood or sat on the other side of the refrigerated counter. The refrigerator shook like the engine of a training aircraft. "Go, go, so I'll pour you some, without money." But then the old woman from the Lenin Square station appeared behind me and muttered something. Baba Toma took her by the shoulder carefully but firmly and tried to calm her down. The old woman spoke without opening her lips. This often happened in my dreams. You understand what a person is saying, but his lips do not move, like those of dolls in some ancient cartoons that I sometimes remember. But the old woman broke away, looked me straight in the eyes. "Oh God, why me, why?" and said sternly, "Woe to those living now. Woe to the vain and cruel age." And she also spoke, looking into the void, as if reading an invisible, ancient book. Winter was approaching, and in the human world there was something in the air that resembled winter languor, a foregone conclusion, which was on everyone's lips. It was necessary to prepare for the cold, stock up on food, firewood, but in the days of the triumph of materialism, matter turned into a concept. Food and firewood were replaced by the food and fuel question. People in the cities were helpless like children in the face of the approaching unknown, which overturned all established skills in its path and left behind devastation. Although it itself was the brainchild of the city and the creation of the townspeople, people were deceiving themselves and talking all around. Everyday life was still limping, floundering, trudging somewhere lamely out of old habit. I wanted to ask someone where my father was, but I already knew without any questions that the waitress would tell me without opening her mouth, "He is not here." I woke up because sweat was running down my face. The mathematician was squatting in front of me. Vladimir Pavlovich waved his hand reassuringly. I realized that the mathematician was afraid that I had caught some kind of infection. No, it was somatic. It was because of rapid dreams. Very interesting.